Welcome to another episode of A Drink with John. I am coming to you once again from Rome, the eternal city, Caput Mundi, the crossroads of the Catholic world. And here in Rome, it is 4:15 in the afternoon, so it is entirely appropriate that I am enjoying a lovely, refreshing Italian beer in this spiffy little Fortnight for Freedom mug, brought to us by the good people at the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. And that's not all the USCCB's Fortnight for Freedom campaign is bringing to us, because they are also bringing this entire video series to us. We have been talking to a series of experts and commentators from a variety of walks of life who, in one way or another, have something to say on the importance of religious freedom as part of this Fortnight for Freedom effort of the U.S. bishops, which runs from June 21st to July 4th every year and is intended to promote awareness of and respect for religious liberty, both here in the United States and around the world. But you could say, folks, that this entire series has, in a way, been building to this moment, because today we are going to have the opportunity not to talk to an expert or commentator or just another voice in the conversation, but the point man of the United States bishops on religious freedom, is the chair of the ad hoc committee on religious liberty created by the United States bishops a number of years ago, and in a sense, the guy who was responsible for these terrific mugs. So, I mean, with no further ado, let's get to our guest, Archbishop William Lori of Baltimore. Archbishop Lori, thank you so much for being with us here today, and thank you for these terrific mugs. They are a gift to God.
John, thank you so much, and I'm really glad you're so enthusiastic about the mugs. It's a little early for me to use mine, but before the day is out, I probably will use it.
Only if the Orioles had a day game would it be appropriate for you to have a beer right now. Am I correct?
That's true. That's true. But it's great to be with you, John. Thank you.
Well, and listen, I mean, obviously, thank you for what you do on behalf of the issue of religious liberty domestically and internationally. So let's begin with this. The United States bishops created this ad hoc committee on religious liberty some years ago. And one outgrowth of that, obviously, this Fortnight for Freedom campaign. Can you explain to us what the genesis of the Fortnight for Freedom campaign was, how it's evolved, and what you hope it's achieving?
Sure. The Fortnight for Freedom really was created, like many other efforts in the conference, to raise awareness of the issues that pertain to religious freedom at home and abroad. It was created to be a vehicle for prayer and for education and for action. And so it was one of the first things that the Ad Hoc Committee on Religious Freedom came up with. We decided on this period because within this 14-week period, this fortnight, there is the feast day of St. Thomas More and John Fisher, and also a number of martyrs, people who died for their faith, and it culminates on July the 4th. So it seemed to us, it seemed to the committee, a wonderful opportunity to raise awareness. Now, when it began, some 5-6 years ago, this will be our 6th, I believe, it was a brand new thing, and it included a lot of big rallies and a lot of big ticket events. I think as time has gone on, it has become less an occasion for a lot of big events and more an occasion for people to gather in smaller groups, study groups, to raise awareness in parishes, through the prayer of the faithful, through preaching aids, and of course through a couple of signature events, most notably the opening Mass in the Basilica of the Assumption, the nation's oldest cathedral right here in Baltimore, and the closing Mass at the National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception on July 4th. This year is a little different, though, because of the convocation of Catholic leaders in Orlando. That's where the final Mass will be this year.
And maybe we can take even a further step back. When the bishops created the ad hoc committee that you lead, there was a perception, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there was a perception among the bishops that this cherished value of religious freedom, which has always been part of the American concept, was to some extent being eroded, or at a very minimum, that it was facing new challenges. And can you explain why the bishops arrived at this concern that religious freedom might be in jeopardy, or at least being rethought? And over the period of time that the committee has existed and the Fortnight for Freedom has unfolded, is it your perception that the situation has changed for the better, for the worse? Are we roughly where we were when we started all of this? What would the diagnosis be?
I think years ago, when the ad hoc committee was created, I believe it was the result of reports coming into the conference of bishops from all around the country, not of outright persecution and not those kinds of very blatant things that we see overseas, tragically enough, but more a sense that there were assaults on religious freedom, often at the state and local level, in the form of unfriendly legislation, in the form of non-discrimination bills that were actually discriminating against people, religious people and religious institutions, in the form of policies, in the form of court decisions. The word erosion is a pretty good word. When there's only minor erosion, no one gets alarmed. But after a while, you begin to see bigger chunks of the shore washing out to sea, and you begin to say, you know, it might be time for us to shore this up. And I think that was the perception. For example, in Connecticut, when I was serving there was a bill actually introduced that would have changed the way in which parishes are managed. Now, we didn't ask for this. God's holy people didn't ask for this, but a couple of legislators got the idea that instead of having the pastor with his consultative groups under the direction of the bishop basically manage the parish, they would mandate that an elected committee would run parishes, and that pastors and bishops and folks like us would basically be sidelined from any part in parish or diocesan administration. And it came,
of course, there's a word for that, which is congregationalism.
It is. That was our reaction.
We dealt with the founding of the Catholic Church in America, and we kind of thought we were past that.
We said this is a perfectly good way to run a church if you are a Congregationalist, and that was the established religion in Connecticut until 1819. So we reacted rather strongly to that. We had a great big rally, and we kind of closed the Capitol down. And I had the bad sense to sit down and write a letter on religious freedom. I thought the time had come to not only react against what was quite clearly an assault on the freedom of the church to organize itself as it sees fit according to its own teachings. I thought it was time to kind of get down to the basics of what Dignitatis Humanae, the Declaration on Religious Freedom of the Second Vatican Council, taught. So I did. I wrote this letter with the very unoriginal title of Let Freedom Ring. Someone else had, of course, thought of that before me. And I was
But it never gets old, Archbishop. Never gets old.
It never does. And I'm sitting in a bishop's meeting, and suddenly we're talking about religious freedom at the national level, to my surprise, and flashed up on the video screen is a copy of my pastoral letter. And I said, oh my gosh, this looks serious. And sure enough, the bishops really engaged, and many of them were reporting things happening, not nationally so much, but more locally at the state level. And of course, if you're in a larger municipality, you're going to see some of these things also happening. So I thought it was great that everybody else, that I was not alone, that everybody else was having similar perceptions. And then a couple of months later, when Tropical Storm Irene was about to hit Connecticut, I was down in my basement exercising, and the phone rang, and it was Cardinal Dolan, who said, I'm thinking of creating this. He was our president of the conference at the time. I'm thinking of creating an
for that unimaginable Catholic out there who's been living under a rock for 20 years. The reference is to Cardinal Timothy Dolan of New York, who was the president of the Bishops' Conference at the time that you're describing.
That's correct. Forgive my inside baseball. But so he calls me up and says, we're going to have this ad hoc committee on religious freedom. Would you like to chair it? And that's not a question you should answer when you're on an elliptical. That's a question you should answer when you've prayed for an hour in your chapel. But I foolishly answered it on the spot and said, well, if that helps the cause, sure, sign me up for the duration, which just turned out to be now 6 years. God help me, and God help the conference. But it's been a tremendous education. So in the following September, it was created. My job was to pull together a group of bishops who would have interest in this and some expertise in it. There are bishops that have studied law, have studied other disciplines that seem to be very helpful, to get some first-class consultants and really be just the vehicle by which the United States bishops could sort of shine a light on these religious freedom challenges. And our mandate was mostly domestic. And we began thinking of this more in local terms and being a clearinghouse for what was happening locally, but around the country. It was only a little bit later that we realized that we would have a lot of challenges at the federal level too.
Right. I mean, because actually, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't remember quite the sequence here, but the healthcare reform of the Obama administration or the battles over the contraception mandates weren't actually quite yet there at the time the committee was originally formed, right?
That's correct. That's correct. So that was not on our radar screen at all when we started this work. That's very, very true. The thing we really wanted also to do, and I was charged to do, was to provide teaching vehicles. And we did do a letter, a resource on our first and most fundamental freedom, a kind of a summary of the church's teaching on religious freedom. We got that done rather quickly. And the Fortnight for Freedom, these 14 days in June into July, was also created as an opportunity for us to teach about religious freedom. And while some people say, the word fortnight is really old-fashioned, and it is, and everyone wants.
Well, word. If you want to talk about freedom, you're using a term that comes from our former colonial taskmasters, but it is also a reminder, I suppose, of the American Revolution and the spirit of freedom with which this country was born. So why, right?
I think it's a word that Charles Carroll would have used and Archbishop John would have used. So I'm sticking with it. I like it. But it's
plus the alliteration works very well. I'm all for that.
It does.
All right. Well, listen, bringing the story into the present, Archbishop. You and I are speaking shortly after a new presidential administration has issued an executive order on religious freedom. So let me ask you, what do you make of the Trump administration's policies to date on religious freedom, particularly of document?
Well, I'm certainly glad that the president is interested in religious freedom, and I'm glad for the general statements that have been made about it. And the executive order, I would react to it much as Cardinal DiNardo reacted to in his public statement, which is to say, this looks like a good development. We're glad to see it, especially those parts that promise us some relief of the contraceptive mandate of the Affordable Care Act. But we also realize two other things. Number one, the devil's in the details. Let's see how it works out. And secondly, while this is welcome, there are still a lot of other challenges, even at the federal level, that lay before us. So as regards the contraceptive mandate, we took this as a very hopeful sign. I think certainly Mother Lorraine of the Little Sisters of the Poor, who have in many ways been the public face of this struggle, the sisters certainly were heartened by this, and I think we along with them.
Now, one aspect of this religious order that I wanted to, or this executive order on religious freedom that I wanted to ask you about, is the idea of the repeal, or at least the softening of the Johnson Amendment, which is an element of federal law that, if not quite outright, at least makes it difficult for religious organizations to endorse political candidates. The Johnson Amendment has never really been a focus of the bishop's concerns when it comes to religious freedom. And it's not something you really hear Catholics talking about a great deal. I mean, how do you view that element of this executive?
Yeah, the repeal or even adjustments to the Johnson Amendment have never been a focus for us, and it's not a priority. And in fact, it's not something we're really seeking at all. If you look in Faithful Citizenship, which is the guide or the kind of the moral guide that the bishops put out every 4 years in advance of a presidential election, you will see that we would discourage pastors or other representatives of the church from endorsing or opposing candidates. That's really not our job. I think our job is to raise up the moral dimensions of the issues that face us as a country, to do so in light of the church's social teaching, and to help people form their consciences, really. But to get into partisan politics is a huge distraction from our basic mission, which is to evangelize, which is to spread the gospel, teach the faith, and to take the faith and to apply it by serving others in accord with that faith. That's really our job. And that's what I think the bishops, so we got all these other challenges to religious freedom, and we got all of this work ahead of us with HHS and Secretary Price to make sure that the fix for the contraceptive mandate is really a fix, that it's not another accommodation that we have to fool around with, but a real exemption, that maybe we get preventive services redefined so that they really do pertain to preventing diseases and not to inducing abortions or preventing birth or things like that. We have a lot of work ahead of us. So the Johnson Amendment repeal is really not front and center for us at all. I think we want to stay the course. We do not want to get into partisan politics.
Listen, speaking of what is not your job, I know it is also not your job to make predictions or to make bets, but I'm going to ask you this question anyway and just see what you do with it. As you know, President Trump is going to be meeting with Pope Francis on May 24th in the Vatican. It's going to be a very brief meeting, but nevertheless, it's the first time these two men have been together. What do you think the odds are that religious freedom comes up in that conversation?
Of course, I wouldn't know, but I do remember that when President Obama and Pope Francis met, religious freedom was part of the conversation. And it was certainly very much on Pope Francis's mind when he visited the United States in 2015. So if you think about...
Which, by the way, included a surprise meeting with the Little Sisters of the Poor.
Absolutely. That, in many ways, that was one of those Pope Francis surprises that makes him so endearing. In a way, he has the knack of moving beyond all the words that the rest of us use, and he's the master of the gesture. That was a gesture that said, you know, we really love you, sisters. We know this is not an easy struggle. We know this isn't something you looked for, and they certainly did not. And he just went over to see him, and it spoke volumes. But what he said at the White House and what he said in front of Constitution Hall was pretty great, too. I think he'll bring it up. I think there'll be other things, though, on his mind as well.
Oh, I'm sure there will be other things, but, you know, I'll rush in where angels such as you fear to tread. I'm going to bet this topic comes up in that conversation.
Last thing before Ray, one of the focuses of their discussion is going to be international religious freedom and persecution.
Yes, and that actually brings me to the last question I wanted to ask you, which is, you said a moment ago, quite rightly, that the ad hoc committee and the Fortnight for Freedom campaign really began with concern about domestic religious freedom concerns, and not even national level in many ways, but local. But that over time, it has taken on more of an international dimension. I know this is something you've been conscious about. I've spoken to Cardinal Dolan and Cardinal DiNardo and others about this. And there is now an awareness that threats to religious freedom internationally also have to be part of the mix. And in a particular way, the threats that our brothers and sisters in the faith, that is, our fellow Christians around the world face. Now, I've written pretty extensively about anti-Christian persecution. I just got back from the Pope's trip to Egypt, where Christians, in many situations, are under unimaginable pressures. Talk to me a little bit about what you hope the Fortnight for Freedom campaign can accomplish, not merely in terms of keeping the fire lit for religious freedom in the United States, but also bringing some relief and some awareness to our persecuted brothers and sisters in the faith around the world.
So the theme of this year's Fortnight is freedom from mission. And I think one thing we want to keep saying is that when we defend religious freedom, we are not, and underline that lots of times, we're not being self-referential, to use a good Pope Francis phrase. In fact, our defense of freedom is outward looking. It's all about human dignity, and it's all about the freedom to serve, whether it's at home, with schools, hospitals, clinics, Catholic charities, adoption, healthcare, all of those areas where we are not just serving our own, but serving the common good. It's freedom for mission, to take the love of Christ and to spread it around in really practical ways. If that's our focus locally, how much more ought our focus not turn to our brothers and sisters in the Middle East and Africa, other places, where we have where we have brothers and sisters in the faith and other religious minorities who are being persecuted and killed for their faith, and where we also have people from Catholic Relief Services located right here in Baltimore, or Aid to the Church in Need, or Caritas in its various incarnations. The Knights of Columbus are involved in this, where we are there and where we really want to serve, protect people, give them the necessities of life, help bring them to a place of safety, serve all of the refugees that this religious persecution has created, and to protect some of the most ancient Christian communities in the world. That's big. Now, that's not the mandate of the committee, but we shouldn't be imprisoned by a flow chart. This is something that everybody needs to be worried about. So when we do the fortnight, we certainly throw light on what's happening internationally. We're going to be doing this in this great big convocation down in Orlando. So while I normally have, maybe 1,000 people come to the Basilica for Mass, I think this is going to be a very large Mass and a very wonderful opportunity to talk about what religious freedom really means, why it is really important for the good of every society and the good of every person, why it is crucial for the Church's mission, but also to throw the spotlight on those who are most in need of our love and concern.
Well, Archbishop, I'm going to be at that convocation of Catholic leaders in Orlando, so I look forward to taking part in that Mass. I also look forward to just watching how the fortnight once again plays out this year. Thank you so much for your time today. We have been speaking with Archbishop William Lori, who is the chair of the U.S. Bishops' Ad Hoc Committee on Religious Liberty, the founder of the feast, so to speak, of the Fortnight for Freedom, which runs every year from June 21st to July 4th. This entire video series on religious freedom has been brought to you by the USCCB Fortnight for Freedom campaign, and we have more to come. So please stay with us for another Drink with John dedicated to the theme of religious freedom and the Fortnight for Freedom. Until then, we will talk to you next time.